Hello, I'm Mike Nelson. I direct the Technology and International Affairs program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And I'm very glad you can join us today for what should be a very interesting and important discussion about the future of the internet and who makes the decisions that will shape it. A few logistical issues first. This is an audience participation event. If you want to input questions that can be asked after our speaker provides opening remarks, please type them into the YouTube chat, and we will pick those questions that seem most appropriate to our discussion today. I'm very happy to be organizing this event with Alex Pascal, Megan Roberts, and Casey Brown of the UN Foundation. And I'm very happy at this point to turn the podium, as it were, over to Casey Brown, who is the Vice President for Policy and Strategic Initiatives at the United Nations Foundation. And she will be introducing our speaker, who will be giving some opening remarks. Casey?
Thank you so much, Mike. Welcome to my house. Good morning, I'm Casey Brown from the United Nations Foundation, and we are very pleased to be partnering with the Carnegie Endowment on this important discussion taking place this morning. Last month, the UN Secretary General released his roadmap on digital cooperation, and this was a follow-on to work that began actually several years ago with the high-level panel on digital cooperation. Now, far from being a niche issue in foreign policy and multilateral circles, we are all of us seeing just how central technology and tech governance and cooperation is, and how it affects nearly all of the big issues that are at our doorstep. The UN Secretary General has in the past called to this one of the four horsemen, alongside geopolitical tensions, the climate crisis, and mistrust that demands 21st century responses and action for our shared future. And just last weekend, he reinforced this message in a speak, elucidating what he says are two seismic shifts that are going to shape this century, the climate crisis and digital transformation. Here, we're also seeing just how difficult it has been for policies and governance at the national to the global level to keep pace with these advancements. Now, COVID-19 has further put a spotlight on this fork in the road that we see before us, and how we react to, preempt, and engage a global community around technology. On the one hand, the pandemic has clearly changed all of our lives in many ways and made us appreciate even more the critical role of digital technologies as our schools move online, as our work is remote, as our convenings like this one take place, opening up the discussion and making it more inclusive and diverse. It's been critical to keeping so many parts of our life moving, if sometimes imperfectly. But we also see the pandemic is showing the real cost borne by the nearly half the world's population that's not online and who are already at risk of being left behind, and now even more so. Of the 50% of women who are lacking access to the internet, and with that economic and social opportunities, and that I believe more than 80% of people in the poorest countries that remain disconnected. We're also seeing this dramatic increase of threats to security online and misinformation, this infodemic proportions. Technology is being an epicenter of a dangerous geopolitical contestation between powers, and inequalities that bleed over into so many facets of people's lives, from access to healthcare and telehealth today, to rights over privacy and surveillance, to the ability to benefit from innovations and solutions that new technology can bring in the fight against not just this pandemic, but other global challenges that are at our doorstep, like climate change and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So the way that we come together, or don't, around technology and bridging this digital divide is going to have numerous impacts on our economies, our global relations, and our lives. So when we look at this path that the UN has laid out and the vision for the future of digital cooperation, as we're going to hear about momentarily, it is striking just how timely these calls are to advance digital connectivity and inclusion, to promote and protect human rights, to bolster trust and security online, and to build a sustainable and resilient global architecture for digital cooperation, one that embraces the best of what governments, the private sector, and civil society has to offer. So we at the UN Foundation have been proud to partner with the UN and other actors in this space. And with that in mind, it's my pleasure and honor to have the opportunity to introduce Undersecretary General Fabrizio Hochschild, Special Advisor to the Secretary General, who is leading this important work for the United Nations, in addition to dual hatting another very important work, which is leading the UN's commemoration of its important anniversary this year, to hearing about this important work.
Thank you, Casey. Support and partnership with the UN Foundation, and I'm very pleased to be able, Michael, today, and thank you for this opportunity. I think we have to acknowledge, and our digital technologies present a new challenge of a completely different nature to anything we've faced before. They pose a disruption far greater than any previous technological innovation. Just consider the 25 years after the first commercial automobile was produced, less than 1% of United States citizens could afford one. With electricity, it took 140 years from when Michael Faraday invented the first electrical generator for it to reach half the world. By contrast, with digital technologies, in just 25 years, it's reached 4 billion people, vastly outpacing the speed at which any earlier technology has been adopted. In essence, for the first time in human history, we have an invention that is literally accelerating and shaping human life beyond human understanding. And this has led to serious deficits where the governance of the digital domain, the protection of the public good, has been largely left to self-regulation by technological companies, which for all their brilliance in the technological and business sphere, did not necessarily have the same wisdom in the social, political, and human rights areas. For many years, by default, it was tech companies who set standards on how best to deal with issues of privacy. It was tech companies by default who regulated issues of hate speech or election interference. Tech companies by default were the first line of response to cyber attacks. All the while, policymaking, which always moves at a far slower, far more cautious, far more risk-averse and less proactive space than the private sector or the tech community, the policymaking at the national, regional levels and global levels remained a few steps behind in upholding their main responsibility, which is to protect the public good. Much catch-up has been done and is being done now across the world. And I think the benefits and risks we've seen with COVID has greatly accelerated the catch-up effort. And we're seeing that across the world, and in some regions, they seem to be doing pretty well. But at the global level, and these are global technologies, and you cannot really erect cyber walls, or to do so is extremely costly and rarely works. At the global level, we lag far, far behind in the policy setting area. And this paradigm is off kilter. And it also underscores the need for multi-stakeholder. It underscored the need for the multi-stakeholder high-level panel for digital cooperation. It led to the multi-stakeholder high-level panel for digital cooperation, which Casey alluded to, which was born out of this sense that technology is advancing and policy setting is lagging far behind, and to get wise advice on how to overcome that disjunct, we needed to have an unprecedented multi-stakeholder panel with tech leaders, business leaders, academics, and government dignitaries. The panel, which was co-chaired by Melinda Gates and Jack Maravalli Baba, highlighted the need for the world to come together to better deal with digital technologies, to maximize the benefits, but also to address better the emerging threats to democracy, to human rights, to peace and security. And with the devastating impact of COVID-19, this has further accelerated the urgency for global steerage. We now depend on digital technologies and the internet like never before. Fundamentally, what is clear, and this emerged from the panel, we need to be as innovative in our policy setting as technologies are in their inventiveness. It is for that reason that the panel and the subsequent work by the Secretary General has not argued for the approaches we took, for example, with the steerage of nuclear technologies, traditional conventions, or heavy new UN bureaucracies to address the issue. In essence, we've been advocating for multi-stakeholder cooperation, but it's upon all of us to make that a reality. The cooperation models of the past are no longer sufficient, where governments speak to governments, academics to academics, civil society to civil society, companies with companies, and so on. We need unified approaches where we cross-fertilize from our respective viewpoints. The challenges of the digital age require a common understanding and a shared vision, and most importantly, joint action. And it's to provide the blueprint for that joint action across all stakeholder groups that the Secretary General, based on the work of the high-level panel, formulated the digital roadmap. And the roadmap essentially calls for action in 8 areas: achieving universal, affordable, and meaningful access by 2030, recognizing and promoting digital public goods, including making sure that the most vulnerable are targeted first for our connectivity efforts, building digital capacity to further overcome the digital divide, ensuring the protection of human rights in the digital era, providing a global vision and leadership in the development of artificial intelligence, promoting digital trust and security to advance the SDGs, and finally, building a more effective ecosystem for digital cooperation. In essence, the roadmap of the Secretary General is a call to connect those who are not yet connected, respect better human rights and agency online, and protect better those who are vulnerable to harms online. My office is now working with all stakeholders to take forward the important work of the roadmap and to make sure that we implement. I must underscore in closing that the digital divide is our first priority amongst all these priorities, especially as we seek to build back from COVID. We must recognize that this also entails building back digitally for all, especially those who COVID has shown have been left behind by technologies, those unconnected and excluded, and now more excluded than ever because of the bigger width of the divide. This appeal of greater cooperation comes at a time of unprecedented global polarization and fragmentation. Geopolitical gridlock is higher than it has arguably been since the Cold War. Superpower rivalry is accelerating a great fracture of the online world as we know it. Yet we must ask ourselves, even against that backdrop, a fundamental question about the times ahead of us. What are we going to leave behind for our children? Are we going to leave behind a set of technologies that greatly boost the wealthiest and most connected of our societies, whilst leaving the rest of the world ever further behind? Or will we leave behind technologies that strengthen human rights, peace and security, and improve the quality of life for the most vulnerable among us? Our answer to these questions will depend on our ability to prevent current technology trends from overtaking us. A laissez-faire approach will not work. We often take for granted, my generation, that we have grown up in an era largely marked by human prosperity and peace. In most part, and this is what we take for granted, thanks to the agreements achieved by those who came before us at the height of the Cold War, the peace and prosperity we benefited from did not just fall from the heavens. It was the result of huge foresight, care and altruism, and great diplomatic skill of the post-war, immediate generation of the post-war period. Are we going to do the same, or will we go back down in history as the me now generation, the generation that gorged on the riches of the world at the cost of future generations? Technology, how we manage it, will be key in how we're remembered by those who come after us. As difficult as the divides are at a political level in the world now, and as often as we feel paralyzed, we still have common values forged out of two periods of the greatest suffering in history, in the First and Second World War. Common values that are reflected in our charter, common values that are in our universal instruments and conventions, not least the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we can uphold those values and use them as the basis to move forward. They're timeless, and they have to be also integrated, adapted, and furthered in the digital age. But it's up to us to give them meaning again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabrizio. I know you've been talking about this a lot. This is the second major speech you've done in 3 hours. But now we're going to dig a little deeper. We're not going to cover all aspects of the roadmap. You mentioned that the digital divide and connecting the unconnected is the prerequisite, but we're going to focus more on the question of trust and security, which is often the problem that keeps people from getting online. And we're also going to look at the internet governance issues you raised. And so to help us start the discussion, I'm going to turn it over to Latha Reddy. She's giving us a perspective from India and is an expert on national security and cybersecurity. The internet's global, and so it's only appropriate that we get a view from halfway around the world. Latha is the former Deputy National Security Advisor of India. She's also co-chair of the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace and has served on a number of other blue ribbon committees looking at the future of the internet. So I'm now handing it over to you, Latha.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike, for that. USG Horseshield, we had the pleasure of meeting, not so long ago when I briefed you on the work of the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace. And I was very impressed with the points you made then. Of course, this was before the roadmap was published, but many of the issues you raised in that conversation have indeed been reflected in the roadmap. So I'm sure you had a large hand in the drafting of that. But I want to focus on a specific area. You've spoken of the digital public goods and mentioned the need for open source software, artificial intelligence models, standards, and content, for the need for openness in these areas and accessibility. As you know, in the Global Commission, we have found a great deal of consensus on one of our norms, which was the protecting the public core of the internet. What we meant by this was the technological underpinnings that allow the internet to function, that allow us to function in cyberspace, should essentially be protected both by state and non-state actors. The interesting thing is that this is the one norm that I think has met with almost universal approval. And it has been endorsed by the Paris Peace Forum. It has been incorporated into the EU Cybersecurity Act. So you've already got a good foundation to build on. My specific question to you, and I have a few other questions as well, so I'll go through them all and then I look forward to your response. My specific question is, could this issue of protecting the public core of the internet be considered as a digital public good? Because if we don't have a functioning internet, the entire debate becomes really infructuous. And I also mentioned that even now, the open-ended working group, several countries have been open to this. And in fact, it links very neatly with something that I believe the Indian delegation in the OEWG has also supported, which is considering critical infrastructure as also being a digital public good. I do know that you've covered critical infrastructure in one of the 8 points that you mentioned, but my specific question is, can you treat protection of the public core of the internet as, firstly, a digital public good, and secondly, as part of critical infrastructure? Both these issues, I think, are really important. I also have a question about the new IGF Plus, which is also referred to in the roadmap. One thing is, of course, how can this be issues like the one I mentioned on the public core of the internet be taken up in the IGF Plus? And secondly, what is the actual role you see for an enhanced IGF or an IGF Plus, as we've been commonly calling it? I myself have attended several IGF meetings, and I'm aware that it has emerged as one of the major multi-stakeholder groups. But there has been some hesitation so far in treating that as really a decision-making authority. They've come out with recommendations, but not necessarily, actually taken action on issues. Can they really play a role in norm making? My third question is, how do we actually create norms, whether it's a declaration which lays down certain norms that seem to have wide acceptability, and then we allow countries to sign on? Because I think I've heard some of your previous presentations, Under Secretary General, and I know that you are of the view that achieving a universal treaty will be very difficult, and other speakers have also joined you in that. Of course, in a way, I'm very sad, because I think a global agreement would be really the solution, but it seems an impossible goal at the moment. But we do have to have some norms. And without norms, we cannot go forward in deciding what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And finally, if we do have a game plan for how to create norms and how to achieve the widest possible acceptability for these norms, how do we then go about creating a mechanism for enforcement and accountability? Because without that, norms are meaningless. You have to really say what is going to happen when people violate norms. What are the consequences? And unless, if not universally, unless a group of countries comes together and says, these things are beyond the pale. For instance, in COVID times, we have mentioned COVID a couple of times during the discussion so far. Health services should surely be completely beyond the pale. They should not be touched. Health data, the COVID statistics, it would be as critical an infrastructure as anything else you can imagine, including defense systems or essential services like transportation or electricity or other areas. And so how do you see this procedure actually moving forward? So I'll stop there and give you a chance to perhaps reflect on some of these issues, and then depending on how much time we have, we can get into some other issues. Thank you.
Latha, it's a great pleasure to see you again, and thank you for those questions that really go to the heart of the key issues.
Yeah.
You know, I personally do think we have to recognize the internet as a global public good that needs to be preserved and safeguarded through international multi-stakeholder collaboration on the basis of principles. I think when it comes to some of the technical standards and the technical operation of the internet, some of that is already happening in admirable ways, even if the groups that uphold that are not always as inclusive as they should be in terms of global representation. And so I do think we need greater inclusivity to around the tools that facilitate the operation of the internet. But I think that recognition that this is a global public good is essential, because let's face it, it's a different level, not on the levels of technical standards, but at a different level, at a level of companies operating cross borders, at a level of criteria around content moderation, at a level of criteria around legality of surveillance mechanisms. We're moving to a fragmented internet. We're moving to a series of internets. Many refer to the break between the two major powers and two different approaches to technology. But the truth is that's the beginning. I mean, I think if we continue in drifting in that direction, it won't be two internets, it will be 4, 5, or 6, or 7. And I think that would undermine the benefits of this incredible tool. So I do think we need greater efforts to uphold this as a global public good. And I do think at a national level, we need to look at digital infrastructure as part of critical infrastructure, as you suggest. And I think part of the problem has been that in regulation and taxation frameworks, in some countries, it's been perceived as a luxury. And maybe at the beginning it was a luxury in the way that cars in the first 25 years, when only 1% of the population could afford them, were a luxury. But so many years on, cars are often seen as a necessity. Electricity started as a luxury and has become a necessity. And as our economies, health systems, education systems have all gone digital, our economies have gone digital, we can no longer think of the digital realm and treat it in national regulation, national policy as a luxury. And it needs to be treated in the same way that countries and invested in the same way the countries invest in their road systems, not looking for quick returns or quick profits, but is seeing this as an essential part of building out a viable, inclusive economy. So I completely agree with you there. In terms of your second question on the role of the IGF+, I mean, the IGF's virtue is its multi-stakeholder nature. Its disadvantage is that it's not as inclusive as those who founded it wished it to be, and as it was, I understand, in its early years. There's a deficit in representation of the private sector, and there's a deficit in representation of the global South. So the first challenge is to make it more inclusive. I think its other disadvantage is it's much more of a discussion forum, and some of its members like it that way, than a forum with outcomes. I mean, the IGF is not going to cannot become a norm-setting body. It doesn't have the status in international law to be able to make even soft law. But having said that, if we can improve its representation and make it truly more inclusive geographically and from a multi-stakeholder position, and we can have better focused agendas, and we can enhance its leadership, I think we can ensure that it has much more concrete outcomes that influence the policy world, that are better connected with the policy setting world. And I think that is the big challenge, to make sure, not to turn it into a sort of parliament of the internet, but to give it authority by virtue of its inclusivity and to steer the management of its agenda in such a way that its outcomes will be listened to and will have an impact and will be seen as an authoritative standard for the policy setting world, be it at a national, regional, or international world. And that's the challenge. And I think there's a lot of work being done. Germany and UAE just yesterday did an excellent paper on how we can steer it more in concrete terms in that direction. Finally, and that's linked to the IGF, how do we create norms? I mean, I think first we have to recognize that without greater international understanding and without an articulation of better international principles, we will see a fragmentation of the internet. It's absolutely inevitable. Unless you create a network that binds people together on the basis of common expectations, a common vision, well, everybody goes their own way. And that's exactly what we're seeing a little bit now. But the truth is, in our era, and this is not just in the internet, but this applies to all, there is very little appetite for conventions and hard norms. They're very difficult to come by. And if we think of the global understandings that have been reached in recent years, for example, the Global Compact on Migration, the Global Compact on Refugees, the SDGs, the formulation of the SDGs, they are in essence all political statements. They carry political weight, but they have zero weight in international law. And I think we need to work towards a global political declaration on common aspirations of what we want to see in the internet. I don't think if we're not capable of doing that, the internet we leave to those who come after us will be a splinter net. It will be a collection of internets managed each on their own terms by a fragmentation of like-minded states. And we will be undermining one of the chief virtues of the tools that we inherited and that from its founders had truly universal aspirations for enhancing the public good. We will have betrayed those who put this tool into the world. So as hard as it is in the current international climate, I believe strongly we need to move in that direction. And let's remember, when it came to nuclear technology, the conventions, be they on weapons control, be they on the peaceful use of nuclear energy, they were negotiated in some of the worst times of the Cold War. So, in the past generations have managed the challenge of getting agreements even when there was massive global polarization. So I hope our generation proves up to the same challenge. And in terms of how do you then hold people to account, well, the appetite for formal mechanisms of accountability, we had the birth of the International Criminal Court. Even in areas of genocide and mass killings and crimes against humanity, we're seeing, i.e. the most egregious crimes, we're seeing a diminished appetite, very sadly, for international accountability. So I think formal mechanisms will be very difficult to come by in the current climate, if not impossible. But again, we do have models that work when it comes to the Paris Climate Accord or the Sustainable Development Goals. There's a mechanism of self-reporting that introduces some measure of accountability. So, my sense is that the tech community has been tremendously innovative in terms of how it's addressed technological challenges. And it's, moved forward, often breaking things, to use the Facebook phrase. But the policy setting community has been tremendously cautious. And the challenge for us now is to develop new policy setting frameworks particular to the digital age, to be as innovative, to achieve what you're talking about common global understanding and some degree of accountability, to be as innovative as the tech sector has been, and not just be stuck in the models of the past that, for political reasons, simply are not realistic today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Latha, I want to really say thank you for kicking off the conversation and asking very specific questions that get to the core of the issue, both figuratively and with regard to the core of the internet. We now have about 15 minutes left, and so I'd like to turn to questions from our audience and also say that we have a couple ways that people can submit questions. You can go on the YouTube channel or you can use Twitter. And we have two hashtags. One of them is hashtag UN Roundtable. The other one is hashtag digital cooperation. And we're monitoring that. We've got some good questions already. But let me start with a question that digs a little deeper into what Latha just asked about the Internet Governance Forum. This is something that may seem relatively small compared to the other major themes like connecting everyone who's unconnected. But the truth is that the Internet Governance Forum is providing some incredibly important advice to national governments, and also it's spawned more than 70 different national and regional Internet governance forums. And in a way, this is the hidden piece of the Internet Governance Forum. There'll be 13 major meetings after the one we have this fall online, but there have been hundreds of these national meetings each year, and they have really informed the debate and they've connected people together. So I'd wonder if Fabrizio could give us a sense of what the Internet Governance Plus could do that hasn't been done already. You know, what's been missing and what's the most important opportunity going forward? So, and also just out of curiosity, do we need to change the name? Because more and more of the issues at the Internet Governance Forum have to do with digital cooperation and cloud services and artificial intelligence. So just to be provocative, I'd ask whether we need to change the initials. So Fabrizio?
Yeah, I mean, it's first of all, I don't want to belittle the achievements of the IGF, and in particular of national IGFs. I think depending on the country, you know, they've made very important contributions, and the IGF has proved globally a very important forum for sharing ideas, for people working in the same sphere to meet up, build networks, etc. But I think our starting point has to be not what is being done by this or that body. That is something we need to look at and is undoubtedly important. But what are the challenges we are facing? Where are we heading? And are our existing bodies sufficient to scale and effective in addressing where we're heading to the degree to which we don't believe where we're heading is desirable? And where are we heading when it comes to the internet? We're heading towards a divide that is not being overcome, and in some cases is widening. The proportion of women online compared to men is dropping. So the digital divide in the 21st century with the 21st century tool is enhancing 18th century discrimination against women. We are heading towards a world where the internet, which its founders expected to be a massive tool of democratization and knowledge spreading, is in essence leading to much greater inequalities. It's creating massive, unprecedented growth for some companies, and I say that with huge respect, with no derogatory note at all, and it's leaving the poorest countries way behind. We've created a tool where we've introduced a whole new plane of security threats that hasn't happened since the invention of aircraft and their first use in the First World War as a weapon of war. We have a whole new area for hurting and attacking one another. We've created a tool that facilitates the distribution of hate speech and discrimination and misinformation at zero cost across masses in ways that's never been seen before. So, there are problems here. There are massive virtues, but governance is about enhancing virtues, but above all, it's about protecting the public good. So that's why I'm not talking about the virtues. I don't mean to say there aren't any virtues. So let me ask you, is the IGF, 13 years of the IGF, has it been able to steer and contain those harms? Where is the impact of the IGF in steering and containing those harms? I think there's a deficit. Of course, the IGF can't and won't do it alone. We need an ecosystem of governance systems. The day of having one body to steer everything is gone. But we certainly need to upgrade the IGF to give it greater weight, to benefit from the expertise in a much more targeted way that it brings together. I mean, I used this analogy before, but imagine if the development of air safety and air travel had been left to the Paris Air Show. The Paris Air Show started in 1905, and it was a wonderful get-together, it still is to this day, of people who have everything to do with airplanes to come together and talk. But God forbid, none of us would get on a plane if it had been the Paris Air Show that had been left to ensure our safety in flight. It took much more international cooperation and understanding and completely different bodies. And we need to shift the IGF from a Paris Air Show where people come together and chat on governance issues to something that has a more direct impact in an area that is quickly outpacing our ability to control it.
One of the reasons I'm so excited about the roadmap is it's got the personal attention of the Secretary General, and he's a former head of state. One of the good news items to come out of Paris, where the IGF was held 2 years ago, was that you had the head of state going to speak. And then when it moved to Berlin, Angela Merkel had to be there. So there is a sense that these issues are both political and involve the whole government. And in the early days of the Internet Governance Forum, the people who came from government were from specialized ministries like the Communications Ministry. And now, clearly, governments have come to understand that the Economics Ministry needs to be involved, the Labor Ministry, the Education Ministry. I mean, everyone needs to be involved, and that really means the heads of state need to help create a government agenda. Is there a way that the Secretary General and the roadmap process can engage more heads of state, get more technological vision from the very top level of government?
I think that's precisely, the idea. The sense was that many countries were dealing with this as a technical issue, and it was not getting the political attention it deserved, even though it was impacting on fundamental issues of politics. It was impacting on development, it was impacting on human rights, and it was impacting on peace and security. And yet it was being treated as a marginal technical issue. I think we have seen a change in that regard over the past 3 years. I think it has elevated, but that's also why the Secretary General the Secretary General, by the way, is a politician. He's also an engineer, and he's very proud of his background as an engineer. So he approaches it from both angles, and he was also a humanitarian. So those are the three angles that inform his work on this. But I think that's also why we convoked a high-level panel. Many people said, well, why don't you just get a technical panel of lawyers and tech experts? But we really wanted to raise the level of the issue, which is why we got we had a former president of Switzerland, we had 3 or 4 ministers, we had a Nobel Prize winner. We really got a high-level panel because we believed this wasn't just about getting it right, but it was also about raising this to the political level. And I think we've come a long way, but I think, excuse me, we have still some way to go. Merkel, who was also an engineer or a chemist, I think, or physicist by training, but certainly came from this background. She, I think, with that background as a head of state, she's seen its relevance. President Macron also sees its relevance, but I'm not sure it's yet universal. And why we want to move forward, that's exactly why in the roadmap there is this suggestion of a high-level political declaration. We want heads of state to adopt a declaration on digital trust and security, precisely to make clear that this is a head of state issue that needs to be steered at that level if we're to safeguard our politics, our security, and our human rights, and promote our development in the digital era. And I think we have a little nugget of hope, because in the UN 75 declaration that heads of states will adopt on the 21st of September, for the first time, there's a paragraph on digital technology, which represents the very first time that all heads of state will express themselves on the vital importance of this tool for security and for development. And that I hope we can build on that and build from that something more elaborate. Sorry.
Thank you very much. I'm cognizant of the fact that you've got a very busy schedule, and we've got 4 minutes left. And so at this point, I want to say some thank yous. And in particular, I want to thank my partners in organizing this at the UN Foundation, Megan Brown and Alex Pascal. Alex was the person who first proposed pulling together a joint effort like this, and has been both a non-resident scholar at Carnegie and very involved in the work at the UN Foundation. I also want to thank you, Mr. Undersecretary General, and your team. Jamal Edwards and the rest of the team were great to work with. And I want to thank the team at Carnegie, particularly Amazmi Mandagi and the communications team that did such a good job of making this all work smoothly. I've done a lot of work with multiple institutions, and I have to say that working with these three groups, the UN Foundation, and Carnegie, has been incredibly smooth. And even though we had to pull this together in just a few weeks, it's really come together very well. At this point, I'll turn it over to Megan Roberts, who will kind of pull this together and provide some concluding remarks from the perspective of the UN Foundation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mike. And as Mike mentioned, I'm Megan Roberts. I'm the Deputy Director for Policy Planning at the UN Foundation. I will be quick, also cognizant of the time, and won't attempt to try to sum up this excellent discussion, but I did really want to extend our thanks to USG Hochschild for joining us today, for giving us such an excellent overview of the challenge of digital cooperation today, but also the opportunity and really the imperative that we harness this very unique moment that we're in right now. And also wanted to make sure I gave special thanks to Ms. Reddy for joining us, for giving us such a strong start to our conversation and helping us to dig into these important questions, especially around security and norms. And I know it's quite late where you are, so we're extremely grateful for you joining us. And
not a problem.
And of course, thank you. And of course, I want to thank everyone who tuned in online. We at UNF see this as such an important space, and we're really proud to work closely with UN colleagues and with Mike and the Carnegie Endowment and with others, and we'll continue to do so. So please reach out if you're similarly engaged or would like to be. And I will stop there and thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.